Today we're going to continue talking about Samuel. Last time we spoke about Samuel as a young man, mostly, just introducing who he is and where he comes from, and the good thing that his parents did in giving him to the Lord. And so, just as background to this class, we saw last time that Samuel was born as an answer to his mother's prayer, and he was given to God for life. And of course, that's what we really would hope for all of our children. He was a Levite, and that meant that he could help in the tabernacle, also called the temple in the book of 1 Samuel, and God used him as a prophet from a very young age. It says that it was even before he knew God, when God started speaking to him. And he would be the last judge of Israel, as far as this type of judge that we read about in the book of Judges. All right, so when we get into chapter 7 of 1 Samuel, we find that the Ark of the Covenant had been taken by the Philistines, then it was returned. And they put it in the house of Abinadab in verse 1, and it remained there, it says in verse 2, in Kirjath Jearim for a long time. It was there 20 years, and all the house of Israel lamented after the Lord. And then in verse 3, it says, Then Samuel spoke to all the house of Israel, saying, and he says that they need to turn to the Lord with all their hearts. But I just want us to pause there and just look at the timing here. I suppose it's possible that it's just saying that it was 20 years that the ark was there, and that wasn't... but it was after the ark was returned that Samuel spoke. But I'm not sure. I don't know how old Samuel was when the ark was taken, but it looks like it's about 20 years later when he starts judging Israel, being the judge of Israel. As a young boy, he was not the judge. He was a prophet, but he was not the judge of Israel. At some point, he becomes the judge of Israel. So here he starts telling them to turn back from God, to God. And of course, this would have taken some time to tell all Israel and convince them to turn back to God. But however long that takes, that's how long he worked at it. And in verse 4, it says, So the children of Israel put away the Baals and the Ashtoreths and served the Lord only. And Samuel said, Gather all Israel to Mizpah, and I will pray to the Lord for you. So they gathered together at Mizpah, drew water, and poured it out before the Lord. And they fasted that day, and said there, We have sinned against the Lord. And Samuel judged the children of Israel at Mizpah. And this seems to be where he starts being the judge. Maybe he was considered a judge before this, but this is the first time that this term is used regarding Samuel. And so we find that later on we'll read about kings who get the nation to destroy the idols and do all of this, but they had authority to do that. Samuel gets them to destroy these idols and turn back to the Lord through teaching, through getting to their hearts. And so it's almost more impressive what Samuel does than, for instance, what Josiah does, although what Josiah does is incredibly impressive. But Samuel has this job before him of convincing the people. He's not just speaking from authority. He is, of course, a prophet of God and has authority in that sense, but he doesn't have the authority of a king. But the people respect him. They come to him, and he judges them in Mizpah. Well, we find that after this, that because they're listening to Samuel, God is going to help Israel. So in these next verses, we'll find that the Philistines came to attack Israel while they're busy repenting. They're at Mizpah. And Samuel offers a burnt offering, and it says that God thundered. I'm sorry, I wrote it wrong here. He didn't thunder against Israel. He thundered against the Philistines and confused them so that Israel could overcome them. And so God gives them victory over the Philistines, and it's a very big victory. They drive them back, take over cities like Gaza, and these cities that we often think of as Philistine cities, but they were supposed to be Israelite cities. They had been taken by the Philistines, but they took them back at this time. And it says that Samuel put up a stone that he called Ebenezer, which means stone of help. And it was a marker of how far the Lord had helped them in driving back the Philistines. And so we use that term today. It's in some of our songs. Here I raise my Ebenezer, hither by thy help I've come. You know, putting up some sort of a monument, or at least a mental marker saying, look, I recognize how far God has brought me, how far he has helped me. But anyway, in chapter 7 still, it says in verse 13 through 17 that the Philistines were subdued. The hand of the Lord is against the Philistines all the days of Samuel. Now that doesn't mean Israel didn't have to fight. Of course, we see them having to fight when they have King Saul, but they may not have had to fight much with the Philistines up until they had another king, or a king, sorry. With Samuel, even though his days are overlap with the days of Saul, I think during the time when he was simply the judge, they probably weren't having to fight the Philistines much. I think that came after Saul became king. They had to fight some other people. But at this time, it says there was peace between Israel and the Amorites. And it says in verse 15 that Samuel judged Israel all the days of his life. So really, even after there was a king, he was still a judge. His judging overlapped with the kingship of Saul. And we see that in how he interacts with Saul. And he acts as a judge even towards Saul. But he's a judge in a real sense of the term. It's what we would normally think of as a judge. He was a judge in leading the people against their enemies in some way, although we never see him going out into battle himself. But he is someone especially who is a legal type of judge. In verse 16, he went from year to year on a circuit to Bethel, Gilgal, and to Mizpah, and judged Israel in all those places. So he was a circuit judge. But he always returned to Ramah, for his home was there. There he judged Israel, and there he built an altar to the Lord. So we see he's acting as a judge for all of Israel. He goes around so that people that can't travel that far can still have him coming to hear the hard cases. But mostly he was in Ramah, and that's where he judged Israel. But one of the things about Samuel that we see is the consistency of his good character. And we see consistency on some level with some of them, Deborah or Othniel. But of course, with those, we don't really know a whole lot about them. We don't know very much about their lives. With Samuel, we get a broader picture of his life, and he demonstrates good character from beginning to end. In chapter 8, in verses 1 through 5, it says, "Now it came to pass when Samuel was old that he made his sons judges over Israel. The name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second Abijah. They were judges in Beersheba. But his sons did not walk in his ways, They turned aside after dishonest gain, took bribes, and perverted justice. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, "Look, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations." So we find here that, okay, his sons are not good. Unfortunately, one of them was named Joel, but there are other Joels that were good in the Bible. And this Joel's son was good. He became a singer in the temple under David. But they were corrupt, but it makes it clear that they didn't learn that from their father, right? His sons did not walk in his ways, and the people even said, "Your sons do not walk in your ways." They know that's not how Samuel was. He was not a corrupt judge. And of course, then they want a king to judge them, but that's not really going to help with the main problem. But taking his sons out is what needed to be done. We're not told what happened, but he was never rebuked, at least not that we're told, like Eli was, for how he dealt with his sons. So I assume that he removed his sons from being judges because of their corruption when he found out about it. But we're not really told what happened there. In verses 1 through 4 of chapter 12, after Saul has already been anointed, it says, "Now Samuel said to all Israel, 'Indeed, I have heeded your voice in all that you said to me, and have made a king over you. And now here is the king walking before you. And I am old and gray-headed, and look, my sons are with you. I have walked before you from my childhood to this day.'" So he's saying, look, you have all known me from when I was a child. He was a public figure to Israel from when he was a child because he served at the temple helping the priests. And it was known who he was. He was this child given to God. Israel knew him. And of course, as he became a prophet, even in childhood, they've certainly known about him. And he says, "Here I am, witness against me before the Lord and before his anointed. Whose ox have I taken? Or whose donkey have I taken? Or whom have I cheated? Whom have I oppressed? Or from whose hand have I received any bribe with which to blind my eyes? I will restore it to you." And they said, "You have not cheated us or oppressed us, nor have you taken anything from any man's hand." From his childhood, he has been consistent in his character. He has been righteous and just. They don't have anything they can point to where there's been a problem with how Samuel has dealt with them. And that is very rare. Even with David, you could point to certain times when he was unjust and he repented from that. But it seems like with Samuel, he never even had any time when he practiced injustice. And the people recognized that and confessed that before God, that he hadn't done anything wrong to them in his position as judge. But one of the things that he was also consistent in was pointing the people toward God as the king. And this is important. He is the judge, but he knows who's really in charge. And even after the kings were anointed, he still pointed people to God as the true king. In 1 Samuel 10, in verses 17 through 19, then Samuel called the people together to the Lord at Mizpah and said to the children of Israel, "Thus says the Lord God of Israel, I brought up Israel out of Egypt and delivered you from the hand of the Egyptians and from the hand of all kingdoms and from those who oppressed you. But you have today rejected your God, who himself saved you from all your adversities and your tribulations, and you have said to him, 'No, set a king over us.' Now therefore present yourselves before the Lord by your tribes and by your clans." This is when they're appointing, they're selecting Saul to be king. But he's telling them, even as he's going through the process, because God told him to do it, you've rejected God by saying, let's have a king over us. They should have recognized God has been able to save them. Up until this time, he's still the one who's able to save them. They don't need a king unless God tells them they need a king. In verses 11 and 12 of chapter 12, Samuel tells the people, "And the Lord sent Jerubbaal, Bedan, Jephthah, and Samuel, and delivered you out of the hand of your enemies on every side, and you dwelt in safety. And when you saw that Nahash, king of the Ammonites, came up against you, you said to me, 'No, but a king shall reign over us,' when the Lord your God was your king." So he says, God sent the judges, including himself, Samuel. He even names himself here. He says, the Lord sent these judges and delivered you. And it's not because the judges are special. It's because God is the one behind it. And you said you want a king, but the Lord was your king. He is your king. And so you need to recognize that your thinking is wrong. And then he continues in verse 13 through 15, saying that the Lord has set a king over you. You've done wrong here, but God has chosen to set a king over you. If you fear the Lord and serve him and obey his voice, God is going to bless you, basically. And in verse 15, however, if you do not obey the voice of the Lord, but rebel against the commandment of the Lord, then the hand of the Lord will be against you, as it was against your fathers. And the same thing he says in verses 18 through 25, that when the people recognize that they have sinned in asking for a king, because Samuel calls for on the Lord, and the Lord sends thunder and rain, and it's in the harvest time when it doesn't do that. And they're very afraid, and they say, "Look, we have sinned." And he tells them, "Okay, don't fear. You have sinned, but the Lord is still going to work through this king." But when you get down to verse 25, he says, "If you still do wickedly, you will be swept away, both you and your king." Don't think having a king is going to save you. God is the king. He's always been the king. He will always be the king. Listen to him. And this is something that he was very consistent in saying. And when Saul did not destroy all the Amalekites, Samuel wasn't afraid of Saul. Saul was the king, but the Lord is the true king. And he tells Saul, God is the one who made you. He's the one who anointed you king. And then verse 18, the Lord sent you on a mission. Who gets to send a king on a mission? Only a higher king. And the Lord was a higher king, and yet Saul did not listen properly to him, and he sinned against him. So we'll talk a bit more about Samuel next time, probably wrap it up next time. But I want us to see tonight the consistency of Samuel. He consistently led the people to follow God, to know that following God is the only way to success as a nation. Copying what the other nations did, having a king, none of that was going to make them successful. Only obedience to God would make them successful. As a judge, he was consistently righteous. He would not be corrupt, and we see that was consistent for his whole life. And he consistently taught the people that God was the true king, and even the king that he anointed was required to listen to God. He could not just do whatever he wanted. And that's something we need to recognize in our lives as well. Those in authority are put there by God. If you have authority in your life, in any area of life, you still have to listen to God. As a parent, as an employer, as whatever, you are still under someone higher than you, and that will always be the case. We must listen to God. Let's listen to Samuel's teaching on that. All right, so be like Samuel, be consistent, refuse to be corrupted, lead people to God, and be a blessing to many like Samuel was. Thank you.